The morning lights flickered on across the military station, casting cold, white light over rows of bunks and equipment. Soldiers from a dozen different worlds stirred awake, preparing for another day on the front lines. The station orbited Threshold 9, a contested border world where the Galactic Coalition had drawn its line against the machine swarms they called the Devourers. Velthar clicked her mandibles together as she observed the human section of the barracks. The insectoid officer had been assigned to study the humans, these strange newcomers to the Coalition. Her species, the Hive Collective, shared thoughts and feelings through invisible connections. They had no concept of loneliness. But humans? They seemed lost, scattered, each one a separate island. "They are bizarre creatures," Krenix hissed from beside her. The reptilian weapons officer's scales shifted from green to orange, showing his discomfort. "I have been watching them for 3 cycles now. Their behavior makes no sense." Velthar agreed silently. She had read the reports about human combat effectiveness. They were good fighters, creative and adaptable, but their customs confused her. They did so many things that seemed unnecessary, wasteful even. Across the barracks, a human soldier sat on his bunk. His name was Dae-jung according to the roster. He was a rifleman, average height for his species, with dark hair cut short in military fashion. Nothing about him seemed special. But what he did next made both alien observers lean forward with interest. Dae-jung reached under his bunk and pulled out his rifle. The weapon was standard issue, a kinetic accelerator used by many coalition forces. But Dae-jung handled it differently than other soldiers. He held it gently, carefully, as if it were something precious. He took a clean cloth and began wiping down the barrel, even though the weapon already looked spotless. "Good morning, Grace," Dae-jung whispered to the rifle. Krenix's tail twitched with confusion. Did he just speak to his weapon? "I believe he did," Velthar responded, her compound eyes focusing on the human. "The file says he calls it Grace, a human name." "Why would anyone name a tool?" Krenix asked. "Does he think it can hear him? Does he think it has thoughts?" They watched as other humans began their morning routines. A female soldier named Hye-jin carefully cleaned her plasma carbine, running her fingers along its surface like she was checking on a friend. Another human, Bo-ra, whispered something to her sidearm before holstering it. Tae-ho, the heavy weapons specialist, actually smiled at his massive cannon before loading it onto his back. "They all do it," Velthar observed. "Every human soldier names their weapon. I have seen the reports. Some write the names on the weapons themselves. Others just remember them." Krenix made a sound of disgust. "In my culture, a weapon is replaced when it becomes inefficient. We do not form attachments." He said the last word like it tasted bad. "A warrior who loves his weapon more than victory is a fool." But Velthar was not so sure. She had studied human history, what little was available. These creatures had survived on a death world, a planet that tried to kill them in 1,000 different ways. They had climbed to the top of their food chain through intelligence and cooperation, yet they seemed to desperately need connection, even with objects. The morning briefing began an hour later. Commander Na-young stood at the front of the room, a human woman with sharp eyes and gray hair. Behind her stood representatives from various coalition species. The briefing room smelled of different atmospheres and body chemistries, a reminder that they were all far from home. "Intelligence reports another Devourer push in Sector 7, Na-young announced. "We will be deploying mixed squads for reconnaissance and holding actions. All soldiers are to report to the armory for equipment checks." As the briefing continued, Velthar noticed Dae-jung near the back of the room. He had brought his rifle with him, which was not unusual. Many soldiers carried their weapons at all times, but Dae-jung kept touching it, small gestures that seemed unconscious. His hand would drift to the barrel, adjust the strap, check the magazine well. It was like watching someone fidget with worry beads. After the briefing ended, the soldiers filed toward the armory. Velthar and Krenix followed, their assignment to observe continuing. The armory was a massive room filled with weapon racks, ammunition stores, and maintenance equipment. Human soldiers spread out to their assigned stations, beginning their pre-mission checks. Young Ho, the human engineering specialist, moved from station to station. He was young for a human, barely past their version of adulthood, but he worked with the confidence of long experience. What caught Velthar's attention was how he talked while he worked. "Let's see here, Thunder," Young Ho said, examining Taeho's heavy cannon. "You've got some scoring on the barrel. Been working hard, haven't you? Let me clean that up for you." He spoke as if the weapon could understand him, could appreciate his care. "This is insanity," Krenix muttered. "They treat weapons like pets, like living things." A nearby human, a sniper named Sang Min, overheard them. He looked up from cleaning his long rifle. "You think we're crazy?" Krenix's scales flushed with embarrassment at being caught, but he stood his ground. "I think you waste time on superstition. A weapon either functions or it does not. Talking to it changes nothing." Sang Min smiled, not with anger, but with understanding. "Maybe you're right. Maybe it is crazy." He returned to his work, running oil along the rifle's bolt mechanism. "But old friend here has saved my life 37 times. 37 confirmed kills on devourers that were about to kill my squad. So yeah, I talk to him. I make sure he knows I'm grateful." "It cannot know anything," Krenix insisted. "It has no brain, no consciousness." "True," Sang Min agreed. "But I know, and that matters." Velthar filed away this exchange in her memory. There was something here she did not understand, some human logic that escaped her. Her species shared everything through the hive mind. They never felt alone because they were never truly alone. But humans, each one was trapped inside their own head, their own thoughts. Perhaps naming their weapons was a way to cope with that isolation. She watched Daejung at his station. He had disassembled his rifle completely, every piece laid out on a clean mat. He examined each component carefully, looking for wear or damage. His hands moved with practiced ease, but also with care. The way he handled each piece reminded Velthar of how her people handled their young, with gentle protectiveness. "Grace has been good to me," Daejung said quietly, apparently sensing her observation. 3 years we've been together, through the Outer Rim conflicts, through the evacuation of Terra Nova, through 17 major engagements. She jams sometimes in dusty conditions, but I know how to clear it in 2 seconds flat. She pulls slightly left at distances over 800 meters, so I compensate. She overheats if I fire more than 60 rounds in rapid succession, so I pace my shots. "These sound like flaws," Velthar observed. "Why not request a new weapon?" Daejung looked at her like she had suggested he abandon a friend. "Because I know her flaws. A new rifle might have different problems, ones I don't know yet. Grace and I understand each other. We've saved each other too many times to quit now." He reassembled the weapon with smooth efficiency, each piece clicking into place. When he finished, he lifted it to his shoulder, checking the sight picture. Then quietly, almost too quiet to hear, he whispered, "Good morning, Grace. Ready for another day?" Krenix turned away in disgust, but Velthar continued watching, her analytical mind trying to understand. These humans confused her, frustrated her with their illogical attachments, but they also fascinated her. There was something in the way Daejung looked at his rifle, something in how all the humans treated their weapons, that spoke of a deeper truth she could not yet grasp. The deployment alarm sounded across the station, its harsh wail cutting through the morning routine. The devourers were coming, and it was time to see if these strange human customs had any value on the battlefield. Velthar would be watching closely. Perhaps combat would reveal what observation could not. The dropship shuddered as it cut through the atmosphere of Threshold 9. Inside, 12 soldiers sat strapped into their harnesses, 6 human and 6 alien. The mixed squad arrangement was standard coalition procedure, meant to encourage cooperation between species. In practice, it usually just meant awkward silences and mistrust. Dai-Jung checked his rifle for the 3rd time since boarding. Grace sat across his lap, familiar and solid. He could feel the slight vibration of the ship's engines through her frame. Beside him, Hyejin sat with her plasma carbine held loosely but ready. She had named it Whisper, though Dai-Jung had never asked why. Every soldier's reasons were their own. Across from them, Krennic gripped his standard-issue coalition rifle with scaled hands. The weapon had no name, just a serial number stamped into the receiver. He had already stated his opinion on human naming customs several times. The reptilian's tail kept twitching, a sign of nervousness that his proud species would never admit to feeling. 2 minutes to drop, the pilot announced over the comm system. Hyejin stood, moving easily despite the turbulence. As squad leader, the responsibility for keeping everyone alive fell on her shoulders. She had done this 17 times before. Listen up. Our objective is the communications relay at Grid 77 Alpha. Intelligence says Devourer presence is light, but intelligence has been wrong before. Intelligence is always wrong, muttered Tae-Ho from the back. The heavy weapons specialist adjusted the cannon on his back, the weapon he called Thunder. It was nearly as tall as he was. We go in fast. Secure the perimeter. Hold for tech teams to restore communications. Hyejin continued. Standard suppression rules apply. Stay with your battle buddy. Watch your sectors. Questions? Velthar raised a manipulator limb. The insectoid observer had insisted on joining the mission, claiming she needed to see humans in actual combat to understand them. What if the Devourers are present in greater numbers than expected? Then we call for extraction and fall back, Hyejin said. We are not dying for a radio tower. The dropship's engines roared louder as they descended. Dai-Jung felt his stomach lift, that familiar feeling before every mission. Fear and excitement mixed together, making his hands shake slightly. He gripped Grace tighter. The metal and polymer felt warm from his body heat. He closed his eyes and took a deep breath. You good? Bo-Ra asked from beside him. The combat medic had kind eyes, unusual for someone who had seen as much death as she had. Always am once we hit dirt, Dai-Jung replied. The dropship's ramp opened with a hydraulic hiss, revealing the gray landscape of Threshold 9. The planet was mostly rock and dust, with thin atmosphere and weak gravity. The communications relay stood in the distance, a tall tower surrounded by prefabricated buildings. It looked quiet, too quiet. Move out, Hyejin ordered. They poured out of the dropship, weapons up and ready. The humans moved with practiced efficiency, each one covering a sector. The alien soldiers followed, their movements less coordinated. Different species had different combat doctrines, and those differences showed in the field. Dai-Jung took point position with Grace raised to his shoulder. His eyes scanned the horizon, looking for movement, for anything out of place. The dust shifted in the weak wind. A piece of debris clattered somewhere to his left. Normal sounds, nothing alarming. They were 50 meters from the relay when the first Devourer burst from the ground. The machine was all sharp angles and cutting edges, built for one purpose: killing. It moved with insect-like speed, closing the distance before anyone could react. Its sensors locked onto Krennic, identifying him as the nearest target. Dai-Jung's rifle was already swinging toward it. His finger found the trigger without conscious thought. Contact front, he shouted, squeezing off 3 rapid shots. The first round struck the Devourer's central processor. The second hit its primary mobility joint. The third was insurance. The machine collapsed mid-leap, crashing into the dust 3 meters from Krennic's position. But it was not alone. The ground erupted with Devourers. Dozens of them, maybe more, all emerging from underground tunnels. They had been waiting. The intelligence had not just been wrong, it had been catastrophically wrong. "Contact all sides!" Hyejin's voice cut through the chaos. "Form defensive circle! Pour it on!" The world dissolved into noise and violence. Dae-jung fired controlled bursts, conserving ammunition but maintaining suppression. Grace kicked against his shoulder with each shot, a familiar rhythm. 3-round burst, scan for next target, burst, scan, burst. His training took over, muscle memory developed over years of combat. To his right, one of the alien soldiers panicked. His rifle jammed on the first magazine, and instead of clearing it, he simply dropped the weapon and pulled his sidearm. Dae-jung wanted to shout at him, to tell him a rifle jam was fixable, but there was no time. More devourers were coming. Grace's bolt locked back, empty. Dae-jung dropped the spent magazine and reached for a fresh one. His hands moving automatically, slide the magazine home, release the bolt, back to firing. The reload took 2 seconds. 2 seconds where he was not shooting, where the devourers got closer. Hyejin moved through the chaos like a dancer, her carbine whisper singing its plasma song. Each shot was placed with precision, no wasted ammunition. She had the highest accuracy rating in the company, and it showed. Where others sprayed bullets hoping to hit something, she made every shot count. Bo-Ra worked near the center of their defensive circle, treating a wounded alien soldier while returning fire with her sidearm. She had named it Mercy, which seemed wrong for a weapon. But watching her work, Dae-jung understood. She killed to protect life. Her weapon showed mercy by ending threats before they could harm her patients. Taeho's heavy cannon thundered, each shot sounding like the weapon's name. Thunder lived up to its reputation, tearing through multiple devourers with each burst. But the big weapon had one problem. It ate ammunition faster than any other weapon in the squad. "Running low!" Taeho shouted over the sound of battle. "Conserve shots!" Hyejin ordered. "Aim for center mass. Make every round count." Dae-jung felt Grace's familiar weight in his hands. 37 rounds left in this magazine. He had 4 more magazines in his vest. 185 rounds total. He had faced worse odds before, but not by much. A devourer broke through on his left. Dae-jung pivoted, bringing Grace around. He squeezed the trigger and felt the weapon respond, but the shot went wide. The devourer kept coming. He fired again. The third shot finally dropped it, but it had gotten too close. Grace's bolt locked back again, another empty magazine. But as Dae-jung reached for a fresh one, something felt wrong. The weapon was hot, too hot. The barrel was glowing slightly from sustained fire. He could smell burning oil. "Come on, Grace," he muttered, slamming home a new magazine. "Stay with me. Not now. Not here." He pulled the charging handle. It moved sluggishly. The heat had expanded the metal, making everything tight. For a moment, he thought she would not chamber the next round. But then, with a click that sounded like relief, the bolt slid home. "Good girl," Dae-jung whispered, bringing the rifle back up. Across the circle, Velthar watched with fascination, even as she fired her own weapon. The humans were outnumbered, outgunned, and in danger of being overrun. But they were not panicking. Each one stayed focused, maintaining fire discipline, calling out targets and ammunition status, and they talked to their weapons. She heard Hyejin whisper encouragement to whisper between shots, heard Taeho thank Thunder for each successful burst. Even Bo-Ra, working on a sucking chest wound, murmured to Mercy as she fired one-handed at approaching devourers. It made no logical sense. The weapons could not hear them, could not understand. Yet the humans continued, as if the simple act of talking to their tools gave them strength. Krennic's was not faring as well. His second weapon had also jammed, and he had discarded it for a third. But he did not know this weapon's quirks, its balance point, its reload speed. He fumbled with the magazine, dropped it, had to retrieve it from the dust, By the time he was ready to fire again, the Devourers had advanced another 10 meters. Daijung moved to cover him, Grace barking her sharp song. 4 rounds, scan, 4 more. The rifle was so hot now that he could feel it through his gloves, but she kept firing, kept working, because he knew her limits, knew how far he could push before she would fail completely. "Extraction bird inbound," Haijin shouted. 30 seconds, fighting retreat to the landing zone. They moved as one, humans and aliens together, firing and falling back. The Devourers pressed their advantage, sensing weakness. Metal bodies piled up in the dust, but more kept coming. Always more. Grace's bolt locked back one final time. Daijung had no more magazines. He was empty. But they were only 15 meters from the extraction point. He could make it. A Devourer lunged from his blind spot. Daijung saw it too late, knew he could not dodge in time. His finger pulled the trigger on instinct, even though Grace was empty. Click. Nothing. Then Hyejin was there, Whisper singing her plasma song, dropping the Devourer mid-leap. "Move!" she shouted. Daijung ran. They all ran. The dropship's ramp was open, the pilot screaming at them to hurry. They threw themselves aboard, the ramp closing even as plasma fire sparked off the hull. The ship lifted, engines straining, pulling them away from the swarm of machines below. In the sudden quiet of the ship's interior, everyone collapsed, breathing hard, checking for wounds, counting heads to make sure everyone had made it. Daijung held Grace in his lap, feeling the heat slowly dissipate from the barrel. She had not failed him. Even when pushed beyond her limits, even when jamming and overheating, she had kept working. Because he knew her, because he trusted her, because they were partners. Veltar watched him check the weapon over, his hands gentle despite the exhaustion. She still did not understand, but she was beginning to suspect that perhaps she did not need to understand. Perhaps she just needed to accept that humans were different, and that difference made them stronger in ways her species had never considered. The attack came without warning in the middle of the night cycle. Alarms screamed through the station, their wail cutting through sleep and quiet conversation alike. Daijung rolled out of his bunk, feet hitting the floor before his mind fully caught up with what was happening. His hands found Grace in the darkness, muscle memory taking over. Chamber check, magazine seated, safety off, ready. "All hands to defensive positions," Commander Na Young's voice boomed through the station's speakers. "This is not a drill. Repeat, this is not a drill." The corridors filled with soldiers running to their assigned stations, human, reptilian, insectoid, and a dozen other species all moving together in controlled chaos. The lights flickered as the station's shields took hits from outside. Through the viewport windows, Daijung could see them. Devourers. Thousands of them, maybe tens of thousands, all converging on the station like a swarm of metal locusts. "How did they get so close?" someone shouted. "Doesn't matter," Hyejin replied, taking her position at the defensive line. "They're here! Spread out and hold your sectors!" The station's exterior weapons opened fire, their deep booming audible even through the thick walls. But there were too many Devourers. For every 10 destroyed, 20 more took their place. They crashed against the shields like waves against a cliff, each impact draining precious power. Daijung reached his assigned position at Viewport 7. The transparent material was rated to withstand plasma fire and kinetic impacts. He hoped that rating was accurate. Beyond the viewport, space crawled with machines. They clung to the station's hull, cutting through with torch limbs and acid sprayers, trying to breach. "Fire at will!" came the order. Grace kicked against his shoulder as Daijung opened fire. The shots passed through specially designed firing ports in the viewport, small openings that did not compromise the structural integrity, in theory. Each hit scored on the machines outside, but they kept coming. Relentless, tireless. That was the Devourer way. Young-Ho sprinted past with a hover cart loaded with ammunition cases. The young engineer looked terrified but determined. "Ammo drop!" he called out, sliding boxes to each soldier. "Make it count. Supply runs are going to be less frequent." Less frequent. That meant they were running low. The station's ammunition stores were vast but not infinite, and this battle showed no signs of ending quickly. 2 hours into the fight, Dae-jung's arms ached from holding Grace steady. His ears rang from the constant gunfire. The viewport was cracked in 3 places from devourer impacts. But he kept firing, kept fighting. Grace was hot again, the barrel almost too hot to touch even through his gloves. But she worked. She always worked. To his right, Sang-min fired his long rifle with mechanical precision. Old Friend barked its deep song, each shot perfectly placed. The sniper's face was calm, almost peaceful, like he was at a practice range instead of fighting for his life. Between shots, Dae-jung heard him whisper to the weapon, words of encouragement, words of thanks. The shields failed with a sound like breaking glass amplified 1,000 times. Emergency bulkheads slammed down, dividing the station into sections. Some areas were now exposed to vacuum. Soldiers in those sections had minutes at most to get to safety. "Fall back to secondary positions," Na-young ordered. "Seal sections Alpha through Delta. Reroute all power to remaining shields." They retreated in good order, maintaining fire as they went. The humans moved like they had practiced this 1,000 times. Because they had. Every human child on every colony world learned emergency evacuation procedures before they learned to read. It was just part of being human in a hostile universe. Velthar fought beside them now, not as an observer but as a soldier. Her weapon kicked against her thorax with each shot. She had not named it. The concept still felt foreign, but she noticed how the humans around her never seemed to struggle with their weapons. Even in chaos, even in fear, they handled their rifles with practiced ease. Krennic's was less fortunate. He had cycled through 4 different weapons already. One jammed, one overheated, one's firing mechanism simply broke. The 4th one worked, but it felt wrong in his hands. Too light, too unbalanced. He had not taken time to learn it, and now that cost him accuracy and speed. 3 hours into the battle, Young-Ho made another ammunition run. This time, his face was grim. "Conserve your shots," he shouted over the noise. "This might be the last resupply for a while." Dae-jung checked his remaining magazines. 3 full, 1 half empty, 110 rounds. Not enough. Not nearly enough at the rate the devourers were coming. He would have to make every shot perfect. Grace jammed. It happened on the 47th round of his half-empty magazine. The bolt failed to fully cycle, leaving a round stuck halfway into the chamber. Dae-jung's heart jumped. This was bad. Not a simple stoppage, a serious malfunction. His hands moved automatically. Tap, rack, assess. Tap the magazine to ensure it was seated. Rack the charging handle to clear the bad round. Assess to see if the weapon was back in operation. The stuck round fell out, but when Dae-jung tried to fire, nothing happened. The trigger pulled, but the weapon did not respond. "No, no, no," he muttered, dropping the magazine out completely. He could see the problem now. The extractor claw had broken. Without it, the weapon could not cycle properly. Grace was done. She needed a proper workshop and tools to fix this, not a quick field repair. "Take a replacement!" Krennic shouted from nearby, gesturing to a rack of spare weapons. "Your tool is broken. Get a new one." But Dae-jung stared at Grace in his hands. 3 years together. 3 years of fights and close calls and impossible odds. She had never failed him. Not completely. And now, when he needed her most, she was broken. "Dae-jung!" Hyejin's voice cut through his paralysis. "We need every rifle firing. If Grace is down, grab another weapon now." He knew she was right. Tactically, logically, the correct move was to pick up a replacement and continue fighting. But his hands would not move, would not let go of Grace. It felt like betrayal, like abandoning a friend who was wounded. A devourer breached the corridor 10 meters away. It oriented on Daejung immediately, sensors identifying him as a threat. It charged, limbs churning against the floor, closing the distance with terrifying speed. Daejung's training overrode his hesitation. If Grace could not fire, she could still fight. He reversed the weapon, gripping the barrel like a club. The hot metal burned through his gloves, but he did not care. When the Devourer reached him, he swung with everything he had. The rifle's stock caught the machine square in its central processor. The impact jarred up Daejung's arms, but the Devourer staggered. He swung again. Using Grace as a club, as a hammer, as whatever she needed to be to keep him alive. The Devourer's limbs scored across his armor, cutting through in places. Pain flared in Daejung's side, but he kept swinging, kept fighting. Until finally, with a last desperate strike, he caved in the machine's processor core. It collapsed at his feet, sparking and twitching. Daejung stood there, breathing hard, holding Grace in his bleeding hands. The rifle was damaged worse now. The stock was cracked. The barrel bent. She would never fire again, but she had saved him one more time. "Medic!" someone shouted. Bo-Ra appeared, her hands already reaching for Daejung's wounds, but he pulled away, stumbling toward the weapons rack. He grabbed a replacement rifle, checked it quickly. Serial number 4782A, no name, just a number. It felt wrong in his hands, too heavy. The balance was off, but it worked. And that was what mattered. He returned to his position, firing the new weapon, but it felt hollow somehow. Every shot reminded him that this was not Grace. This rifle did not know him, did not trust him, and he did not trust it. Around the station, the same scene played out with variations. Sang-min's old friend took a direct hit from Devourer acid, melting the receiver beyond repair. The sniper stood there holding the ruined weapon, tears streaming down his face, until his squad mates physically pulled him away and handed him a replacement. Taeho's thunder simply overheated beyond recovery, the barrel warped from sustained fire. The big man set the weapon down with reverence, like laying a fallen comrade to rest, before taking up a new heavy cannon that would never be thunder. 4 hours into the battle, the ammunition ran out. Not completely. There were still rounds left, but the easy access was gone. Every bullet now required runners to fetch from deep storage. The rate of fire slowed. Soldiers began rationing their shots, taking single-aimed shots instead of burst fire, making every round count because there was no choice. Young Ho worked in the armory, surrounded by broken weapons. He had given up on running ammunition and was instead trying desperately to repair damaged rifles. But there were too many. For everyone he fixed, 3 more came in broken. "Talk to them," Hyejin said, appearing beside him. Her own carbine whisper had a crack in the housing but still functioned. Barely. "What?" Young Ho looked up, confused. "The weapons. Talk to them while you work. Tell them you need them. Tell them people are counting on them." Hyejin's voice was gentle. "I know it sounds crazy, but it helps. Trust me." Young Ho looked at her like she had lost her mind, but he was desperate enough to try anything. He picked up the next broken rifle, a human weapon with a jammed bolt. "Okay," he said quietly to the weapon. "I know you're hurt. I know you're tired, but your soldier needs you. Please work with me here." His hands moved over the weapon, feeling for the problem. And maybe it was luck, or maybe it was skill, or maybe it was something else entirely. But the bolt suddenly freed up, sliding smoothly like it had never been stuck at all. Young Ho stared at the weapon in his hands. Then hesitantly he whispered, "Thank you." 5 hours into the battle, Velthar's weapon broke. The firing pin shattered, leaving her with a useless piece of metal and polymer. She looked at the broken weapon, then at the humans fighting around her. They fought with damaged weapons, with weapons they barely knew, with weapons that jammed and failed and broke. But they kept fighting, and they kept talking to those weapons. She did not understand it. Her logical, hive-mind mentality could not process why you would speak to an inanimate object. But she saw the results, saw how human soldiers maintained their discipline even when everything fell apart, saw how they squeezed performance from damaged weapons that should not work at all. Perhaps understanding was not necessary. Perhaps, Velthar thought, reaching for a replacement rifle, perhaps she just needed to try. She held the new weapon awkwardly. It had no name, but maybe it should. Maybe that was what she had been missing all along. Unity, she whispered to the weapon. I will call you Unity, because that is what we need right now. The weapon did not respond. Of course it did not. It was just metal and polymer and circuits. But somehow, holding it felt different now. Felt right. Velthar returned to the firing line, Unity in her manipulators, and joined the humans in their impossible fight. And for the first time since joining the coalition, she felt like she understood them, not through logic or observation, but through something deeper, through connection. The medical bay smelled of disinfectant and blood. Dae-jung sat on an examination table while Bo-Ra worked on the cuts across his ribs. The wounds were not deep, but they hurt like fire. Grace lay on the table beside him, broken and silent. Looking at her hurt worse than any physical wound. The battle had ended 3 hours ago. The Devourers had withdrawn as suddenly as they had attacked, leaving the station damaged but intact. Casualties were heavy. 14 dead, 43 wounded. It could have been worse. It always could have been worse. Hold still, Bo-Ra said, applying synthetic skin to the longest cut. You are lucky these did not go deeper. Luck had nothing to do with it, Dae-jung replied quietly. Grace protected me even when she could not fire anymore. Bo-Ra glanced at the broken rifle. She understood. Her own sidearm Mercy had saved her life twice during the battle, once by firing and once when she had used it to block a Devourer's cutting limb. The impact had destroyed the weapon's slide, but it had kept the blade from her throat. Small price. The door to the medical bay opened. Velthar entered, moving carefully on her many legs. The insectoid looked different somehow. Tired, maybe, though Dae-jung was not sure how to read emotion on such an alien face. May I speak with you? Velthar asked, her translator rendering the clicks and whistles of her native language into standard speech. Dae-jung nodded. Sure. Velthar approached, her compound eyes fixed on the broken rifle. I need to understand something. Your weapon is destroyed. You fought with it as a club, rather than take a replacement immediately. This nearly cost you your life. Why? The question hung in the air. Bo-Ra paused in her work, listening. This was something she wondered about too, even though she was human. Why did they do this? Why did they form these attachments to tools? Dae-jung picked up Grace carefully, feeling the weight of her. The bent barrel, the cracked stock, the broken internal mechanisms. She would never fire again, but she was still Grace. I had a sister, he said quietly. Her name was Grace. She was younger than me by 4 years. Smart, funny. She wanted to be a doctor. He paused, his thumb rubbing the spot on the rifle where he had carved the name years ago. When the Devourers hit our colony world, I was off-planet for training. Grace was home with our parents. I got back 3 days after the attack. There was nothing left. Just ash and metal. Velthar's antenna twitched. I am sorry for your loss. This rifle, Dae-jung continued, was issued to me 2 weeks after that. My first posting after basic training. And every morning when I picked it up, I thought about my sister. About what I was fighting for. About who I could not save, but might be able to honor by saving others. He looked up at Velthar. So I named it Grace, not because I thought the weapon could hear me, but because I needed to hear myself say her name, needed to remember why I fight. The medical bay was quiet for a long moment. Then Velthar spoke again. So the name is not for the weapon. It is for you. Yeah, Daejong said. I guess it is. Bo-Ra finished her work and stepped back. Mercy was my grandmother's name, she said softly. She raised me after my parents died. Taught me that strength means protecting others, not hurting them. When I became a medic, when they issued me a sidearm, I named it after her. Because every time I have to use it, I need to remember that I am taking a life to save lives. That is mercy. Hard mercy, but mercy nonetheless. Velthar processed this. Her species did not have individual loss the way humans did. When a member of the hive died, their memories and experiences were absorbed into the collective consciousness. Nothing was truly lost. But humans? Each human death was unique, final, a complete erasure of an individual perspective. No wonder they clung to names and memories. I would like to understand more, Velthar said. Would you show me? Daejong nodded. Together they left the medical bay and walked through the station's corridors. Damage was evident everywhere. Scorch marks, broken panels, emergency repairs being conducted by tired engineers, but the station still stood. They found Hyejin in the armory, working on Whisper. The carbine's housing was cracked, and the plasma containment field was unstable. By all rights, the weapon should be scrapped, but Hyejin worked with intense focus, trying to save it. Hyejin, Daejong said gently, can you tell Velthar about Whisper? The squad leader looked up, surprised. Then she saw the earnest curiosity in the alien's posture and nodded. Whisper is named for the voice that saved my life, she said, returning to her work. 5 years ago, I was alone on a patrol, got separated from my unit during a devourer ambush. I was hiding in a collapsed building, wounded, running out of air in my suit. I had given up, was ready to just close my eyes and let it end. She adjusted a component inside the weapon, her movements precise despite the emotion in her voice. But then I heard this voice, quiet, like a whisper. It said, get up. Just that. Get up! I do not know if it was real or hallucination or what, but I listened. I got up. I fought my way out. And when they issued me this weapon, I named it Whisper. To remember that sometimes survival is as simple as listening to that quiet voice that tells you to keep going. Velthar's antenna quivered. So your weapons are named for hope, for memory, for the things that keep you fighting when logic says you should stop. Yeah, Hyejin said, a small smile crossing her face. That is exactly it. They found Taeho next, in the recreation area. The big man sat with his destroyed heavy cannon across his lap. Thunder was gone, the barrel melted beyond repair, but he held the weapon like a fallen friend, unable to simply discard it. Thunder was simple, Taeho said when asked. I named it for the sound it made. That beautiful booming sound that meant my friends were safe, that the enemy was falling back, that we were winning. He ran a hand along the ruined barrel. But really I named it Thunder because that sound covered up another sound. The sound of screaming, the sound of people dying, the sound of everything falling apart. When thunder was roaring, I could not hear those other sounds. And that made it bearable. In the rec area, Ji-eun sat with a data pad making notes. The human xenoanthropologist had been documenting everything, trying to analyze and understand the human behaviors that confused their alien allies. It goes back to the beginning of our species, Ji-eun explained when Velthar approached her. Humans have always named the things important to our survival. We named our ships, our vehicles, our homes. Ancient humans named their swords, their horses, their shields. We are a species that evolved to form bonds, not just with each other, but with the tools that keep us alive. But why? Velthar asked. My species shares consciousness. We are never alone. But you humans, you are trapped in your individual minds. Why extend that loneliness to objects? Because we are not extending loneliness, Ji-Yun said gently. We are fighting it. Every name is an act of connection. Every whispered greeting to a weapon is a reminder that we are not alone. That we have history, memory, purpose. You have the hive mind to give you those things. We have names. Velthar thought about Unity, the weapon she had named in the heat of battle. She had not expected it to change anything, but somehow, holding that rifle had felt different after naming it. Not because the weapon was different, but because she was different. Because she had made a conscious choice to connect with her tool instead of treating it as disposable. They found Sang-Min last, sitting alone in his quarters. His destroyed rifle, old friend, lay on a cloth before him, disassembled. The sniper was cleaning each piece carefully, even though the weapon would never work again. Old friend was the first weapon I ever received, Sang-Min said without looking up. I was 18, terrified. Did not know if I would survive my first battle. But this rifle was there, and it worked. It kept working through mission after mission, year after year. It never let me down, not once. So I started calling it Old Friend because that is what it was, the one constant in my life when everything else was chaos. He held up the melted receiver, looking at it in the light. I know I will get a new rifle. Already have one, actually. But it will take time before it becomes Old Friend, before I know its quirks and trust it completely, before it earns a name. How long? Velthar asked. Sang-Min smiled sadly. However long it takes, you cannot rush trust. They sat in silence for a while. Then Velthar spoke, her voice hesitant. During the battle, I named my weapon. I called it Unity. I did not understand why at the time. But I think I am beginning to now. Daejong smiled. What made you choose that name? Because I realized that you humans are not alone in your isolation, Velthar said slowly. I am part of the hive mind, yes. But here, on this station, I am separated from the greater collective. I have been alone in a way I never was before. And naming my weapon, speaking to it, creating that connection, it helped. It made the isolation bearable. That is all any of us are doing, Daejong said softly. Making the isolation bearable. Making the fear manageable. Making the fight worth fighting. Our weapons become more than tools because we need them to be. We need something constant, something reliable, something that we can trust absolutely when everything else is uncertain. Velthar looked at him with her many eyes. Your species confuses me. You are illogical, emotional, prone to attachments that seem counterproductive. And yet you survive. You thrive. You fight harder than any species in the coalition. Perhaps because of these attachments, not in spite of them. Maybe, Daejong agreed. Or maybe we are just too stubborn to know when to quit. They laughed at that, human and alien together. Outside, the station's repair crews worked to fix the damage. Engineers welded hull breaches, medics tended wounded, supply officers counted remaining ammunition. Life continued, as it always did after battle. And in the armory, Young-Ho worked on repairing weapons. As he worked, he talked to each one, asking them to work just a little longer, thanking them for their service, promising to take care of them. The weapons did not answer. They never did. But somehow, they seemed to work a little better afterward. And maybe that was the point all along. The warning came at dawn shift. Long-range sensors detected a massive devourer fleet approaching. Not a raiding force this time. Not a probe or skirmish. This was an armada, hundreds of ships converging on the station with clear intent, complete destruction. Commander Na-Young stood in the command center, studying the tactical display. The numbers were brutal. The station had maybe 3,000 defenders. The devourers were bringing what looked like 50,000 machines. The ammunition stores were already low from the previous attack. Medical supplies were running short. Morale was fragile. Estimated time to contact? She asked. 6 hours, the sensor officer replied. They will be in weapons range in 5.5. Na Young looked around the command center. Human officers stood beside alien counterparts, representatives from a dozen species, all united against a common threat. But would unity be enough? Send a message to Coalition Command, she ordered. Request immediate reinforcement and resupply. Already sent, Commander. They say the nearest fleet is 8 hours out. 8 hours. They needed help in 5. The math was simple and unforgiving. Then we hold for 8 hours, Na Young said firmly. Prepare all defensive positions, every soldier to their stations, every weapon loaded and ready, and someone get me a damage report on our ammunition situation. The report came back worse than expected. The previous battle had depleted over 60% of their kinetic ammunition. Plasma charges were down to 40%. The heavy cannons had enough rounds for maybe 20 minutes of sustained fire. After that, they would be relying on small arms and whatever they could improvise. In the armory, Young-Ho worked frantically. He had been awake for 36 hours straight repairing weapons. His hands shook from exhaustion and stimulants, but he kept working. Every repaired rifle meant one more soldier who could fight. One more chance for survival. Dae-jung arrived to collect his replacement weapon. The rifle that had replaced Grace was functional but unfamiliar. He had spent the last day learning its quirks, its balance, its reload speed. It was not Grace, would never be Grace, but it would have to do. Any word on repairs? He asked Young-Ho. The engineer shook his head. Grace is gone, man. The receiver is cracked, the barrel is bent, the firing mechanism is destroyed. I could maybe salvage her for parts, but she will never fire again. Dae-jung nodded. He had known that, but hearing it confirmed still hurt. What about this one? He held up the replacement rifle. That is 4782A. Solid weapon. Tends to pull slightly right at long range. Reload is smooth, but the magazine catch is stiff, so you need to push hard. Do not let it get too hot, or the gas system will foul. Young-Ho rattled off the details automatically. He knew every weapon in the armory now, had learned them all through desperate necessity. Thanks, Dae-jung said. He started to leave, then paused. Hey, Young-Ho, you should name yours too. The weapon you carry. The engineer looked down at the sidearm on his hip. It was a standard-issue plasma pistol, unremarkable in every way. I am not a combat soldier. I just fix things. You are fighting now, Dae-jung said. We all are, and you should name it. Trust me. After Dae-jung left, Young-Ho stood alone in the armory. He drew his sidearm and looked at it. Just a tool, just a weapon. But then again, so had Grace been, so had all of them been, until humans made them something more. Hope, he whispered to the pistol. I will call you Hope, because that is what we need right now. The weapon did not respond, but Young-Ho felt better anyway. The Devourers arrived exactly on schedule. They came in waves, ship after ship, disgorging machines onto the station's hull. The defensive weapons opened fire immediately, carving through metal bodies. But there were too many, always too many. The battle began with a roar of weapons fire that shook the entire station. Every soldier fought from their assigned position, pouring fire into the machine swarm. Human, alien, young, old, experienced, and green. None of it mattered. All that mattered was the fight. Dae-jung fired controlled bursts from Viewport 7, his new rifle kicking against his shoulder. He whispered to it between shots, learning its rhythm. Come on, 47A2, work with me here, just like Grace did. The rifle kicked harder than Grace had. The recoil pattern was different, but it worked. It kept working. Beside him, Velthar fought with unity. The insectoid had spent the last day practicing with her weapon, learning its balance and trigger pull, and she talked to it now, just as the humans did. Unity, we need you. Stay strong. Krennic fought on the other side. The reptilian had finally taken time to learn his weapon, had finally given it a name. He called it Valor, after a concept from his homeworld meaning strength through adversity. It felt strange to name a tool, but he had watched the humans fight with broken weapons, had seen them maintain discipline when all logic said they should flee. And he had seen Velthar, a species even more logical than his own, adopt the human custom. Perhaps there was wisdom in strangeness. 1 hour into the battle, the ammunition started running low. Soldiers began rationing shots, making every round count. Young Ho and his team ran supplies from the deep storage, but it was not enough. Would never be enough. 2 hours in, the first defensive line fell. Emergency bulkheads sealed, trapping devourers in isolated sections, but also cutting off escape routes. The station was being divided into smaller and smaller defended zones. 3 hours in, Hai-Jin's carbine whisper finally failed completely. The plasma containment field collapsed, making the weapon useless. She held it for a moment, this tool that had saved her life dozens of times. Then she set it down gently and picked up a replacement. "Stay safe," she whispered to Whisper, knowing it was foolish but unable to stop herself. Then she turned back to the fight with her new weapon. It had no name yet. She would learn it in time, if she survived. 4 hours in, the kinetic ammunition ran out completely. Soldiers switched to plasma weapons or fell back to melee range. Dae-jung fired his last magazine, felt his rifle click empty, and drew his combat knife. Around him, other soldiers did the same. The devourers pressed harder, sensing weakness. But the coalition forces did not break, did not flee. They held their positions with empty weapons and makeshift tools, and they talked to their weapons, even the broken ones, even the discarded ones, thanking them, encouraging them, creating connection in the face of annihilation. 5 hours in, Taeho's replacement heavy cannon ran dry. He set it down, picked up a fallen soldier's rifle, and kept fighting. The rifle was unfamiliar, awkward in his large hands. But it worked. He made it work. "Thank you, Thunder," he said to his old weapon as he left it behind. "You were the best." 6 hours in, Commander Na Young's voice came over the station-wide communication. "All forces, this is the commander. I will not lie to you. Our situation is desperate. We are out of ammunition. Our weapons are failing. The enemy is at our gates." Soldiers listened, fighting even as they heard her words. "But I have seen something these past days," Na Young continued. "I have seen humans fight with weapons they loved, and I have seen our alien allies learn why we do this, why we name our tools, why we form these bonds." Velthar fired Unity until the power cell was exhausted. Then she used the weapon as a club, just as Dae-jung had done with Grace. "A weapon is only as reliable as the trust we place in it," Na Young said. "And you, all of you, have shown me what trust means. So I ask you now, trust your weapons. Trust your training. Trust each other. Hold the line for 2 more hours. Help is coming. We just need to survive until it arrives." The words were simple. The situation was impossible. But somehow hearing them made a difference. Dae-jung's new rifle ran dry. He had learned to call it Grace 2, honoring the original while acknowledging this was a new tool, a new partnership. He dropped the empty weapon and picked up another from a fallen alien soldier. This one had a name carved into it in a language he could not read, but it had been loved, had been trusted. He could feel it in how well-maintained it was. "I will take care of you," he promised the unfamiliar weapon. "Just help me protect my friends." 7 hours in, the station was barely holding. Half the defensive positions had fallen. The devourers were inside the station proper now, fighting in corridors and living spaces. It had become a close-quarters nightmare, soldiers fighting with knives and improvised weapons when their rifles finally failed. But they fought, humans and aliens together. Speaking to their weapons, speaking to each other, creating bonds of trust and connection that held stronger than any armor. Young Ho stood in the armory, surrounded by broken weapons. Hope had run out of power an hour ago. He held a wrench now, ready to use it as a weapon if the Devourers breached this far. Around him were hundreds of damaged rifles, broken carbines, melted barrels. The tools of war, broken but not forgotten. "You all did good," he said to the silent weapons. "Thank you." The Devourers breached the armory door. Young-Ho raised his wrench, ready to fight with a tool never meant for combat. But then he heard it. Weapons fire from behind the Devourers. New weapons fire. Different frequency. Coalition forces. The reinforcements had arrived. Fresh soldiers poured into the station, pushing back the Devourer swarm. They brought ammunition, brought relief, brought hope. The tide turned. The machines, for the first time, began to retreat. The battle ended 8 hours and 13 minutes after it began. The station stood, battered, broken in places, but standing. The defenders had held, barely, but they had held. In the aftermath, as medics treated wounded and engineers assessed damage, something remarkable happened. Alien soldiers who had survived the battle began visiting the memorial garden. They brought their weapons, the ones that had saved their lives, and they placed them there with reverence. A reptilian soldier mounted his rifle with care, the name Strength carved into the stock in his language. An insectoid placed her plasma carbine beside it, the name Courage etched on the barrel. Species after species, soldier after soldier, all contributing weapons to the memorial. Velthar placed unity among them. The weapon was damaged beyond repair, but it had kept her alive, had taught her what humans knew instinctively. That connection was survival. That trust was stronger than any armor. Daijung stood before the memorial, looking at the rows of named weapons. Grace was there, given a place of honor by his squad mates. She would never fire again, but her name would be remembered. Her story would be told. "You know," Sang-min said, appearing beside him, "I think I understand now why we do this. It is not about the weapons at all, really." "No?" Daejung asked. "No, it is about refusing to be alone. In this huge, cold universe, humans refuse to face existence alone. So we create bonds with everything, our ships, our weapons, our tools. We give them names and histories and meaning, because that is how we survive. Not through superior firepower or better armor, but through connection." Daejung nodded. He looked down at Grace too in his hands. She had earned her name today, had proven herself in the hardest way possible. She was not Grace, would never be Grace. But she was hers now, and he was hers. A partnership, a trust. "Good work today, Grace too," he whispered to the rifle. Across the memorial garden, soldiers of a dozen species spoke quietly to their weapons, thanking them, encouraging them, creating bonds that logic said were impossible, but which had proven stronger than any enemy. A weapon is only as reliable as the trust you place in it. And trust requires a name, a bond, a promise to never give up on each other. This was the human way. And now, after seeing what that way could accomplish, it was becoming the coalition way too. Somewhere in the distance, Young-Ho worked on repairing weapons. And as he worked, he talked to each one, learning their quirks, learning their names, creating connections. Because in the end, that was what mattered most. Not the weapons themselves, but the bonds they represented, the trust they embodied, the promise that no matter how dark things got, no matter how impossible the odds, you would never face it alone. Grace was gone. But her legacy lived on in every named weapon, in every whispered greeting, in every bond between soldier and tool. She had been more than a rifle. She had been a promise, a reminder, a connection to something worth fighting for, and that Daejung realized was why humans named their weapons. Not out of superstition or primitive thinking, but out of the deepest human need to transform the cold and mechanical universe into something warmer, something meaningful, something worth surviving for. He looked around at his fellow soldiers, human and alien alike, all learning this lesson together, all creating their own bonds with the tools that kept them alive. And for the first time since Grace's destruction, Dae-jung smiled. The universe was cold and hostile. The machines would come again. The fight was far from over, but they would face it together. Soldier and weapon, human and alien, names and bonds and trust, and that would be enough.